Judas, and we're talking about Judas Iscariot, of course. One of Jesus' 12 apostles. The only one, at least as far as tradition goes, the only one who was not from Galilee. He was the treasurer of sorts of the apostles who eventually betrayed Jesus and ultimately hanged himself. He is said to be, at least in this material, in this book, the man who was guilty of a horrible crime. I guess that would fit. But he's an interesting character, mysterious in a lot of ways. There's a lot, I think, that can be said about him. Some good, mostly probably not so good. As far as good goes, I would say Jesus did choose him. And I don't know if we can go so far as to say that the only reason that Jesus chose him was because he knew he would betray him. I'm not so sure if that is a safe conclusion, that that's the only reason at all. Sure, I have no doubt that Judas likely had some redeeming qualities, just like everybody. Almost everybody has something, some sort of, it's not everything they do is bad or evil or the thoughts of their heart necessarily. Judas probably had some qualities. Not only did Jesus choose him as one of the 12, but he chose him to be in charge of the money. Now that makes it even more interesting because we learn a little bit of something. Whenever Judas shows up, it rarely is because of something good, but because of, a lot of his character shows in the times that he appears, which is not incredibly often, but there are a few times. John says something interesting about him, that he was a thief. In fact, he says he was a thief from the beginning. He was a thief. Strange then that Jesus would have put him in charge of the money. But he did. And he may have done a lot of his job well with the money. He apparently was greedy, and that may have made him decent at handling the money. I don't know. Yeah, Dean, go ahead.
You would have thought he was collecting tax, and since he was a tax collector, he handled money a lot. You think he would be the best qualified, so we know that he chose Judas for a reason.
Yeah. Let me take back one thing I said. It doesn't say he was a thief from the beginning, but it does say he was a thief. John 12:6. So John tells us that he used to help himself with the money box. So I guess whenever he saw fit, he was okay with taking some of the money away out of the box, because John says he was a thief. And also, if you remember, when one of the Marys comes in, Mary, the sister of Lazarus and Martha, she came in to anointed Jesus, or took this expensive ointment and anointed Jesus' feet and wiped it with her hair. It was Judas who spoke up and said, why wasn't this is a waste, is what his point was. What a waste. That's expensive stuff. It could have been sold, and the money that you could have gotten from it could have been a nice, generous donation to the poor. Problem is, this is where John says the reason Judas mentioned this is not because he cared about the poor. He didn't care about the poor. He wanted that large lump of money to be added to their money box, because the more money's in that money box, the more money he could help himself too. So his motives were, he just used the poor as an excuse.
All that stuff, I never really thought about it, but I don't think he planned ahead to distract, like, supper or whenever he asked Jesus, is it I or whatever, I always take that to mean that he legitimately hadn't pre-planned, like he legitimately didn't know yet that he was going to do what he did, like it was an impulsive thing that he did.
Well, there are only two options. Either he did not know at that point if he was going to do it, and he was genuinely asking, or he did know and he wanted to see if Jesus knew about it.
But he knew Jesus had the ability to.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions that we don't have the answers to with Judas, and that's one of the reasons why he's so mysterious. That passage in John 12 leads us maybe to think that his motives were generally less than good, because if that's the way he was thinking then about the ointment, then it may lead us to assume anything else that he did was also, the motives were not pure. Yeah, Dean?
Well, we know that he wasn't the only one that had some, like they even thought were bad judgments. Because we know that when the mother of James and John, she went to Jesus, she had an ultimate motive, but so they weren't,
They were all guilty still, yeah, they were guilty.
they were just as guilty in one some sense as Judas in this because of the fact that his mother went and wanted them to be one of them left, one of them right.
Yeah.
Well, and Peter denying them.
Yeah.
Peter made mistakes. Now, I will say, to cut Judas a little bit of slack, in Matthew and Mark's account, neither one of them mentioned Judas at all in that situation with the ointment. They said, Matthew says, when the disciples saw it, they were indignant and said, why this waste? And Mark says, there were some who said to themselves, why was this ointment wasted like that? It's only John, who presumably wrote later than the others, who said it was Judas. Judas is the one who said, this could have been sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor or whatever. So it is, he wasn't the only one, apparently, who thought that was a waste. So do with that what we may. Judas, of course, his legacy is that he's the one who betrayed Jesus. Now, as we already mentioned, we don't know when exactly he was determined to do this, at what point. We know that at one point, late in Jesus' ministry, we read that the devil, more or less, entered him, as it says. His heart was turned. And at that point, he had reached a point where he was going to do it. Yep.
We know that while they were meeting, they all asked, was it I? Because Jesus said, one of you is going to betray him. And they all started asking him. And then there's the one who gets his bread and sauce with it. And Jesus looked at Judas when he did it. So I think maybe at that time he thought, well, God and Christ already said that he was the one.
Yeah.
So he just more or less, well, as you already know, I might as well go ahead and do it. I guess or something like that.
Yeah, after when Jesus is going to wash their feet, it says the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot to betray him. So At that point, it had come into his heart for whatever reason to do this. The mystery about Judas is why he did this. And by the way, I think a lot of people misconstrue what Judas actually did, not to make it less than it is. Jesus was taken and killed because Jesus meant for it to happen. Not because anything Judas did. If the thing that Judas did was led them to a place where they could get Jesus alone, because that's what they were trying to do. There were several times where they wanted to take him, but they couldn't because they were afraid of the people. So they needed to find Jesus in a moment where the crowd wasn't there, which was hard to do because the crowd went everywhere he went. But Judas knew that he had this custom of going to the garden there to pray, and he did. He knew he was going there. So what Judas did was he said, I can lead you to a place that he likes to go alone. That's what he did. So the reason they got Jesus is because Jesus wanted them to. He let them. He said it was going to happen. Yeah, Dean? Yeah.
It probably just records, like, what was going to happen in Jesus' free will, but it's saying if Jesus hadn't done that, then there still wouldn't have been Jesus to be arrested.
Yeah, even if Judas hadn't done it, Jesus came to the earth to give his life. And he told them, this is what's going to happen. They're going to take me. They're going to beat me. They're going to crucify me. And I'm going to rise again on the third day. So it was still a betrayal. I mean, he betrayed Jesus because he went to the enemies that wanted to get him and said, I will lead you to him in a vulnerable position. And that's it. That's what he did. Once they got there, Jesus said, who are you looking for? They said, Jesus, is that you? He said, that's me. Yeah. So here I am. Let's go. He said, why do you come with, these weapons or whatever? I mean, I'm always openly speaking in the temple and stuff. I mean, take me. Dean, do you have something else? Yeah. Yep. But this was the time. David? Yeah. Yeah, that's the tragedy of Judas's life, is the way it ended after that. And it's an interesting study, to compare Judas and Peter, because they both betrayed him in a way. Peter did too. Dean, yeah.
But it also told that Christ was to stand alone. And that's when all the other, when they arrested him, that's when, he was really all by himself. That's all the other apostles left him.
Yeah. I meant for all this to be up here already, but if you grabbed a paper, it's basically from the paper. But so Judas agreed to a price with 30 pieces of silver, and even that was prophesied in Zechariah 12, I think it is, or 14, somewhere around there. But he goes through with it. But the thing that maybe confuses us, or that at least leads me to draw some conclusions about Judas, is the way he reacted to Jesus being condemned. In Matthew 27, Matthew is the only one that records this part. It says, "Then when Judas," Matthew 27:3, "his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned," or it says when he was condemned, but it seems he's talking about Jesus. He is Jesus there in the context. "He changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, 'I have sinned by betraying innocent blood.' They said, 'What's that to us? You go deal with it yourself.'" They obviously wanted no more to do with him or that situation. "And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself." Yeah, here's the phrase that draws my attention. When Judas saw that Jesus was condemned. That is when he changed his mind and went back and tried to take it back. Why then? This is where my mind goes. Why would this have happened it wasn't when he saw Jesus get arrested and taken away. It wasn't when Jesus said, "Friend, do what you came to do." It wasn't when he saw him, being tried. It was when he saw that Jesus had been condemned. That leads me, now this is just my opinion, that leads me to believe that Judas didn't actually think that they were going to get away with it. He may have believed in his feeble mind that this would just be a quick buck or something, and that there's no way they could take Jesus. He's not going to let them take him. I've seen him get away from them 100 times. Not 100, but several times. But this time, it suddenly came crashing down on Judas that this time was different. And he wasn't doing anything to help himself. And it was only going to get worse, from that perspective. So, again, that's just my opinion. The text doesn't explicitly say that, but the fact that it says, when he saw that Jesus was condemned, he suddenly had great remorse as far as it goes. He regretted, and he tried to take it back. He even said, "I've sinned." Yeah. Yeah, devil made me do it. Yeah, none of that. Yeah.
So all of them were still looking for an earthly king and an earthly kingdom.
Yeah. I mean, in a very strange way, this actually shows perhaps that Judas actually did believe in Jesus. That, it's not that Judas thought that he was a fraud. He believed, if my assumption or assessment is true, especially, he believed that Jesus, that they wouldn't be able to take Jesus if he didn't want them to. Yeah, yes, sir.
I believe your assumption is correct.
Huh?
And the reason I say that is because Jesus had just performed his most amazing miracle when he raised Lazarus from the dead after being dead for over 3 days and 3 nights. He proved that he was God.
Yeah.
Only God had that power. So at that point, there should have been no doubt in the apostles' mind that they're really dealing with the Mashiach, the chosen one, the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think, like you said, I think it was a quick buck as far as Judas was thinking. This will be easy. I'll turn him over and he'll just fade and get away. And
Yeah.
I'll get the money and they won't get to him.
Yeah, no harm done.
But that's not how it worked out. And
Yeah.
this is evidence of this being part of God's master plan in the beginning.
Yeah. Sadly, it seems Judas didn't really, like the other apostles, didn't take Jesus' words to heart that they're going to arrest me and take me and kill me. Yeah, he told them at least, and plainly at least a couple or 3 times.
And of course, like you said, though, they all thought that the church that he was going to set his kingdom was going to be an earthly kingdom. In one sense, it is, but yet it's a spiritual one that God had in plan from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because it was going to be an eternal kingdom, everlasting kingdom. The kingdoms on this earth only last for a while, then they're going to be gone.
Yeah. One thing we know from Judas's own mouth is that one thing he believed about Jesus was that he was innocent. So he said it himself. I betrayed innocent blood. They weren't having it. They didn't want anything to do with it. They had already done their dirty deal, and they wanted it as much space as possible, probably. And the greatest tragedy of all is Judas, I guess a thing that he did not believe or understand about Jesus was just how merciful and forgiving he is. And he felt that there was nothing he could do. He had done all he could do by offering to give it back. When they refused, he threw it down. He didn't want it. But then he tragically went and ended his own life.
I mean, how often do we do things that we're like, I don't even ask forgiveness for that?
Yeah,
I mean,
I think we can relate.
not often, but I mean, it happens. And I mean, because our most difficult hurdle is forgiving ourselves. We know that God will, but we can't bring ourselves to Him. And so, I mean, he would, if he hadn't taken his own life, he was probably looking at, like, how do I live like this?
Yeah. How can I face him again? Like,
Or any of the other.
yeah, or the others. We might do similar things where I'm so whatever that at the thought of facing them again, I'd rather just never speak to them again. Like, I'd rather do that than, we may not, kill ourselves, but we may just, rather than facing the person and owning up to the thing and asking forgiveness, we'd rather just never speak to them again. I mean, that's a similar mentality at least. Yeah, David?
You know, there's a lot of things against that, and crucifixion, resurrection,
Mm-hmm.
all that. But then, one interesting thing when Roman soldiers said Jesus died after he died, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. So that affected him. I mean, some say in history that soldier eventually became a
Yeah. Yep. Just to show how crooked the chief priests were, he throws the money down, and they sit there and they're talking amongst themselves, and they said, "It is not lawful to put that money into the treasury because it's blood money." Here's how ironic that is. It's blood. They're the ones who gave him the money that turned it into blood money, and yet they're saying, "Whoa, it would not be lawful to put it into the treasury." Apparently, they didn't use that kind of, integrity in the deal in the first place. Wouldn't be lawful for us to give this man 30 pieces of silver to betray. Now all of a sudden it's blood money. But
And how often did Jesus call them hypocrites?
pretty often, I mean, he wasn't afraid to call it out, and that's exactly. Here's another example of it. Yep. Here's the thing about looking at Peter and Judas. They were in very, very similar situations at the end. Peter denied him 3 times. Said, even to the point of, "I do not know the man. I don't even know who he is." After that, Peter was the lowest he'd ever been after Jesus was killed. So, we think about, things like, and probably sometimes from the movies and stuff or things that we hear, like imagining like the last thing you said to a loved one was something mean. And how you would never be able to, you would never get over that. Well, the last thing Peter did was, shout at the people, "I don't even know who that man is." And then Luke tells us Jesus turned and looked at Peter as if he just heard all of that. And then it came to his memory. He sat there and told me that I was going to do this. And I said I wasn't going to do it. And here I've just done it. And then he ran off and wept bitterly. Now at that moment, he and Judas are in the exact same situation inside. The difference was Peter finally came back around to Jesus and faced him and helped himself to rise above his low, to come out of the hole he dug for himself. Whereas Judas, tragically, was so distraught and felt and lost in a feeling of hopelessness, he just went out and killed himself without repenting, even though he could have been forgiven. I mean, there's no doubt he could have been forgiven if he had turned to the Lord in repentance and asking forgiveness. Yeah, Dean.
This also reminds me about Paul. He referred to himself as the chief.
Yeah.
So I mean, even though he first,
Persecuted.
persecuted the church, and I'm sure that to his dying day he regretted that because of the fact that he caused a lot of the Christians to deny Christ, and they were, put to death. They were put to death at him. So I mean, so I'm sure that he regretted that all his life as a Christian.
I'm sure he did. And, whenever Jesus appeared to him on that road to Damascus, he was kind of at a rock bottom low too, because suddenly his whole world just turned upside down. He could have done the same thing. He could have done what Judas did, but he didn't. He turned to God, and thankfully the Lord sent Ananias to him and healed him of his blindness and baptized him into Christ. So it's a tragic end, tragic in a different way than, like Josiah. His end was tragic as well. We talked about him recently, a few weeks ago. but different because it didn't have to end that way. And it's a tragedy anytime someone takes their own life. But for Judas, just knowing that he could have turned back, he could have gotten what he was obviously would like to have had, because he tried to, he actually did try to undo the thing that he did as far as he could.
He should have thought about that he didn't need the forgiveness of the people who gave him money. He just needed the forgiveness of God and Jesus. And that's
Yeah.
what mattered.
Well, I mean, I think it was an appropriate thing to do, to go back and, yeah.
I'm saying, their response hopefully didn't contribute to.
I think it probably did. I can't help but think it did.
Regardless of their response, he still could have made it right.
Yeah.
The way they responded.
I don't think their response helped.
Yeah.
I don't know how often have you even said, like, intellectually we can know something, but if it doesn't translate to the heart,
Yeah.
And we sabotage ourselves.
it's a lost cause. And I think that's the difference between Peter, Paul, and Judas, is that with Peter and Paul, I mean, Peter's, when the sheep came down with the animals and God said, kill and eat, he says, I've never let anything unholy,
Yeah.
touch my mouth. And so Peter had been a law keeper. Paul had been a law keeper. They had always tried to the best of their ability to keep God's law, and Judas didn't have that same heart.
Apparently not. If only the emotions that led him to try to go to the chief priests and elders and confess would have led him to go to Jesus. Well, he couldn't literally go to Jesus because Jesus was taken, obviously, but he could have, turned to God and done the same thing. And even his word, I've sinned. But it's almost like, yes, I know that he's forgiving. I've seen him forgive sins before. I know I've been with him all, these 3 years. And I know that, in theory, he's willing to forgive, but not this. Not of this. Not what I've done. I've betrayed him, directly to.
This is not my fault.
Yeah. So that's the sad thing is the idea apparently that, yes, God, he will forgive, but not me because of the thing that I've done. And that sort of, like you brought up, puts Paul maybe in a closer comparison to Judas than Peter even, because he was persecuting. I mean, the way Jesus put it, you're persecuting me because you're persecuting my church. But Paul did receive forgiveness because he went to God for forgiveness. By the way, Acts chapter 1, verses 18 and 19 do not contradict Matthew 27. We don't have time to get into it, but some have suggested that Luke and Matthew say that he died in two different ways, but doesn't really amount to that. Luke just gives a little bit more detail in Acts 1, and not very pretty details, by the way. This man acquired a field with the reward of his wickedness, and falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, and all his bowels gushed out. Lovely. Obviously, it's easy to reconcile Matthew's account and that account in Acts 1 is he hanged himself, and his body was hanging there long enough to the point that it fell and burst open when it fell. Luke doesn't necessarily say that that's how he died. It just says he fell. But again, it doesn't amount to a technical contradiction, because both of them could happen, and they both things are true. In other words, And he acquired the field with the money because it was his money that bought the field, according to Matthew's account. A field of blood. Can't put it in the treasury, blood money. But they bought a potter's field, and that it was called the field of blood to this day, Matthew says. So, lessons from Judas. Couple. We never know where a wrong path may end. Sin only needs an opportunity to carry us to its utmost depths. Judas was on a path, and sadly he followed that path. Didn't have to. Could have turned at any point, but he rode it to the end. And then it is possible to be associated with Jesus, to hear his gracious words, witness his wonderful works, yet reject him in our hearts and be ultimately lost. I mean, Judas was with Jesus. You talk about a privilege. Heard Jesus for 3.5 years or so. Everything that we read about Jesus doing, except for that very, very end, whenever Jesus told him, go and do what you're going to do, and he left. We can assume that everything that we read about that Jesus did, Judas saw it firsthand, with his own eyes. And all the teachings, he heard it with his own ears. And everything else. And yet, it didn't sink in as it should have. Or he would never have even tried to make a quick buck like that. Even if Jesus had gotten away from him, like he seems to have thought he would, he still turned him over to them, led them to him. That is, he didn't turn him over to them, but he led them to him where they could get him. And just a great tragedy. It is a tragedy anytime somebody refuses to repent, especially if they refuse to repent because they think they're not worthy of it. Because Jesus died. That's the irony. He gave his life so that you could be forgiven. So not only is there no such thing as somebody who's unworthy of forgiveness, they're so worthy of forgiveness, Jesus gave his own life so they could have it. And sadly, Judas took his life in his own hands instead of rising above his lowest point and turning to God.